D.A.D. Delivering a Dream About Delightful Abba, Deity, and Daughter by Judi White, Part 2, Son, Chapter 8, Jesus, My Bridegroom. Till death do us part? Really? There came a time in my marriage that I had to evaluate if I was going to be able to live up to the commitment of a lifelong marriage. The decision that arose out of that self-analyzing session was unification. Unity does not mean uniformity or sameness. Unity means oneness of purpose. Just as the Godhead is made up of three distinct persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, each unique in personhood, yet at the same time one in essence. Unity reflects a oneness that does not negate individuality. Tony Evans. Many years had gone by before I had accepted Jesus as my bridegroom. I had become blatantly aware that while humans disappoint, Jesus did not. When it was obvious that my husband did not want to grow together in the ways I needed, I felt it was necessary to submit to Jesus' changes in me, which inevitably moved me to being the best helpmate I could be to my spouse. Jesus posed the question, can two walk together even when they disagree? Which is a spin-off of Amos 3:3. The answer in my marriage has been yes. Dino and I don't agree about much, which is why, year by year, Jesus gradually repaired my erroneous behaviors so that our marriage became more of what Dad designed it to be. It is our responsibility to leave a legacy to our children, for our children. A productive, abundant marriage is the beginning of a healthy legacy. The example of our marriage would have forced my children to think way outside the box because the solutions to the arising problems required creativity due to the vast differences between Dino and I. Like Jesus, we are role models and should take that responsibility very seriously. When considering marriage and family, my goal of highest priority was to create a safe home that our children would not have to endure unnecessary trauma. These days, it's a necessity to have a healthy belief system regarding marriage. Otherwise, it seems an inevitable, slow, painful death. Statistics show that marriage has a less than 50% success rate. After talking to many people, both married and divorced, it's my understanding that a large majority blame their failure on marriage itself or their spouse instead of accepting the responsibility and part that they played in its destruction. It always takes three to make a marriage work. God, husband, and wife, the threefold cord. The only party that will never be guilty is Jesus. Every couple or praying partner has to allow him access to repair what is broken in themselves and in the marital relationship. From the perspective of someone who has been unequally yoked in marriage for 25 years, I testify that Jesus will make a difference in the marriage, whether one or both spouses are praying. Also, the positive mission statement will help maintain a healthy outlook on this very important subject. A mission statement will help a couple stay focused once they know what they want and what direction they are intending to take with their family. There are many different seasons in every marriage. There are no perfect marriages. You may think that is a no-brainer, but for a former perfectionist to admit that is step one. Step one is where all change begins. I'm hoping my readers and my children will choose to learn from my mistakes. While my husband prefers the trial and error method in life, I definitely prefer knowledge and wisdom leading to good, solid choices with a 98 success ratio. Okay, you probably know by now that I'm not the most realistic person on the planet. Reality sucks. I'm an idealist. Remember, I walk by faith. Recently, I've been educating myself with the Rich Dad, Poor Dad teachings. The author, Robert Kiyosaki, encourages making mistakes. His theory is fail as fast as you can. The more mistakes you make, the more you learn. I dread this idea. Why can't I just learn the right way the first time and avoid making mistakes altogether? Why isn't learning from others who have blazed the trails before me adequate? After teaching my children what I know, I fear they may not make the same blunders I made. Instead, they will make completely different ones. Why? Teenage love. Dino was 18 when we met. I was 15. It was like a fairy tale. My knight in dysfunctional armor. We dated for 2 years. There was never a dull moment. Mom liked Dino. We went to school together. We worked together. June 1987, I escorted him to his graduation. Then we broke up. Even though we technically were not a couple, we saw each other often. In September 1991, just before leaving to college, Dino decided to revive the relationship. At that time, Dino was employed by Miller Western Forest Products, which meant he had a comfortable, well-paying job with benefits and was beginning to think about settling down. I left to begin the adventure of post-secondary in hopes of creating a career for myself. We maintained a long-distance relationship for the 2 years I resided in Calgary. As the second year of college came to an end, I was actually excited to get home, but not before the most exciting part of my education. Not until I got a taste of what the life of a jet-setter would be like. The icing on the cake of the travel counseling program was the 2-week class familiarization trip to Mexico. The travel program facilitators organized the trip to show the class what would be expected of us as representatives in the travel industry. Once we were all ready for takeoff, my classmates, knowing that I'd never been on a large aircraft, watched me for any possible reactions. The ride was relatively uneventful, other than the thrill of liftoff and landing. After disembarking at the airport, we transferred via bus to the hotel where we would stay. Our first week destination was Mazatlan. After check-in, we settled into our rooms and dressed for the beach. Each day we toured properties, experienced authentic cuisines, explored excursions, and generally had a lot of fun, even though we were on the job. At the end of the day, we enjoyed the beach and then the dance clubs. Experience is an excellent teacher. Running excitedly at full speed into the ocean for the first time turned into a pungent reality check. I learned a valuable lesson after the waves smashed against my body and splashed into my open mouth. Life can be both sweet and salty. Logically, I knew the ocean held salt water, but it wasn't until that moment I realized I wouldn't want to drink from it. Life can sometimes be a cruel teacher. Dino's words rang in my head. There is clearly a difference between book smart and street smart. I was only 22 and I'd never been out of Canada. My Mexican adventure taught me to hold on to an attitude of gratitude. Living in a first world nation affords us luxuries that third world nations do without. Walking down the street licking an ice cream, I was approached by children with big sad eyes staring at my treat. The experience reminded me of Mum repeating, "Don't you know that children in Africa are starving?" Apparently in Mexico too. So I handed my refreshing treat over to the little boy and he happily received it. After 7 days in Mazatlan, we departed via coach bus to Puerto Vallarta, where we repeated the activities of the first week. After returning from Mexico and completing my internship, I hightailed it home without even going through the ceremonies to receive my diploma. Frantically, I threw my possessions into the car and left Calgary life in the dust. Choosing what waited for me in Whitecourt meant leaving some dreams in Calgary. Homeward bound. The road that I usually drove to Whitecourt and back was the road less traveled, free of cumbersome law enforcement, so I was free to drive as fast as my heart desired. About an hour after beginning my journey, still with the pedal to the metal, I could see some headlights in my rearview mirror. Due to the speed I was traveling, I figured if it were a cop, he would have pursued me already, so I continued at my pace. The vehicle advanced toward me, and eventually the red and blues came on. When I turned down the blaring music, I heard the sirens. After decelerating and pulling my car to the side of the road, the officer approached with his flashlight aglow. "Where are you headed in such a hurry, young lady?" With a Cheshire cat grin, I explained. He flashed his light into the back seat, corroborating my story, and let me off with a merciful warning. "Slow down. You're not going to make it home at all if you continue at that speed." I was grateful that I didn't get a ticket, but the ticket, or the warning, wasn't going to slow me down. I was headstrong and hasty. The warning signs were there. I just chose to ignore them. Dad's instruction process. For 2 years, Dad had my full attention. From the moment I landed in Calgary, I felt Dad's leading. My transformation should have been complete considering all the counseling and education I received. Besides college, every week my schedule contained daily devotions, going to church, Bible study, counseling, 12-step dysfunctional family support group, and the women's shelter training. Joanna, the head facilitator of Victory in Christ and my mentor, had warned me many times about marrying someone that didn't love Dad. She passionately pleaded with me to trust God in the area of our relationship. She wanted me to let Dino go until his heart was open to accept the salvation Jesus offered. She was wise counsel because the advice she gave me was from personal experience. Dad had won Donald over before they were married. If only I had acknowledged Joanna as a divine appointment, maybe I would have seen the sign. In hindsight, the similarity of D plus J, Donald and Joanna, versus Donald, aka Dino, and Judi, is just an irony. Often I have had to force myself not to think about my disobedience and instead think on Romans 8:28. Not sharing my Christian walk with my husband has been my greatest suffering. Equipped with all the knowledge my extracurricular 2-year education in Calgary had supplied me, I should have been prepared for any hurdle life could throw at me. Not quite. Life is a 2-part learning test, knowledge and experience. As the saying goes, you can take the girl out of the trailer park, but it's not easy taking the trailer park out of the girl. Upon returning to Whitecourt, I moved in with Dino. It didn't take long before my conscience got the better of me. I knew that sex outside of marriage was wrong, so I moved in with James, his girlfriend, and their children. I no longer got settled in, and Dino convinced me to move back in with him. Dino either couldn't or didn't want to understand the struggle in my heart. For Dino, life was what you made of it. He worked for everything he got. God had never done anything for him, therefore God didn't exist in his world, but Dad was real to me. Marriage was not an option for me. It was a necessity, and I certainly wasn't having children without being married first. The ties that bind. Before our wedding, and as a result of the movie screen vision, I recorded all the names of the men I'd fornicated with and conducted a spiritual ceremony to sever the spiritual sexual bonds we had created. As I prayed, I took scissors and cut each name in half, trusting that Dad, dutiful active defender, aka Jesus, was forgiving and spiritually releasing me from the collaborators so that I could be one in marriage with my soon-to-be husband. It was an exercise in trust that Jesus was more than able to do as I asked. John 13:7 says, Jesus replied, "You don't understand now what I'm doing, but someday you will." To become one. Brian Simmons' version of the Bible, which he entitled The Passion Translation, opened my eyes to view the creation of woman differently than I'd understood in the past. Instead of taking Adam's rib, as I'd been taught, what if God split Adam in two down the center, like the covenant rituals he performed in the Old Testament? What if Dad, definite alpha deity, took half of Adam to create his perfect Eve? Maybe man is not complete until marriage. Is it a coincidence that for generations we've referred to our spouses as our other half? At last, the Adam exclaimed, "This one is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh. She will be called woman, because she was taken from man." This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Genesis 2, verses 23 and 24. Dino and I started planning our wedding. Life was flowing along unobstructed until we went to the pastor of the church I had attended since I was 8 years old. After asking him to marry us, the pastor looked at me and said, "I don't understand, Judi. You say you believe in God, but you deliberately disobey him." It was not understanding he sought. Following his statement, he agreed to marry us if we lived apart and abstained from sex until our wedding night. Now I didn't understand. I had been having sex with Dino since I was 15 years old. What was abstaining from sex until after our wedding going to prove? Weren't we considered joined in God's eyes the first time 10 years earlier? I knew sleeping around was wrong, but we were acting like a married couple. All I wanted was Jesus' blessing. In hindsight, I truly did not know what I was doing. I thought that by getting married, we'd be making right my wrongs. After all, I was making sure that our babies would have parents that were committed to one another. My convictions about marriage before babies was very strong, and Dino was only subjecting himself to the ritual of marriage so we could get to the actual making babies part. I didn't realize then how important it would become to me to share my faith walk with my husband. On the way out of the church, I buried my face into Dino's chest to hide the tears that were about to fall from my face. Dino tried to console me. His idea of comfort was that we would get married in a hall by a justice of the peace, and we did. During the ceremony, I envisioned Jesus coming down and standing in the place of the officiant. He held our hands and interceded for us. That is my gracious bridegroom, whom in that moment gave me his blessing. But just because Jesus forgave me didn't mean I forgave myself. No, I would punish and berate myself every time something went wrong, wishing I had obeyed. Dino and I were married in the summer of 1995, but that didn't stop it from snowing an inch that day, right in the middle of the day between the ceremony and the supper. Everything was put on hold until it stopped snowing. Then the sun came out and it was hotter than Hades. The heat from the sun dried up all the snow, and we were able to commence with the beautiful pictures on the lake, and everything carried on as if there had been no interruption at all. Maybe this snow was a sign of Dad's measure of grace. Snow in summer is an honor out of season. Proverbs 25:13. So maybe he was blessing me even though I had been disobedient. While in Calgary, I had learned to be dependent on God, and returning to Whitecourt, I seemed to have reclaimed my independent attitude. Alcohol or not? During the wedding planning stages, as usual, Dino and I disagreed about some things. At my request that we not have alcohol at the wedding, he was downright insulted. That wasn't an option. Didn't I know who his family was? That was the problem. I wanted to eliminate the possibilities of embarrassment that were inevitable with the presence of alcohol. Envisioning the nightmare of letting loose the spirits of addiction on my special day, I just wanted my wedding memories to be positive and heartwarming. The combination of Dino's relatives mixed with my Joker family, possibly beautiful day could very quickly be turned into one big cauldron of porch crawler. You know, the drink where every kind of liquor is mixed together and you never know what kind of reaction it will produce, but you do know it's the worst reaction possible, most likely explosive. The representative at the liquor store suggested a loony bar, Canadian $1 coin, based on the honor system. What a laugh! What honor! Dino's twin brother started strip dancing on the table, and his cousin was caught stealing bottles of liquor until finally he passed out. We paid for the booze with our wedding gift money and then some. That night we stayed in a hotel room instead of our home. Mistake number 2. Arriving home the next day, ready to grab our suitcases and head to the airport for our honeymoon, we opened the door to a huge surprise. The nightmare continued. Our home that I had left spotless was completely destroyed. I had to force myself not to cry. There was syrup poured on the ceiling fan, which dripped onto the floor. There were no clothes in the dressers, closets, or my suitcases, only on the floor mixed with Rice Krispies. Toothpaste on the mirrors, gel on the toilet seats. The mess was an incredible masterpiece of destruction. Not one person was around when we needed help cleaning up. It was kind of symbolic of the mess I would be cleaning up for the rest of my life because of the choice I'd made. Either that or the enemy was giving me his blessing. We should have eloped and skipped directly to the honeymoon. Hindsight is 20/20. Regardless of my decisions, Jesus was only ever a whisper away. We survived, cleaned up the mess, and drove to the airport to inaugurate our honeymoon. At least I had the positive memories of my honeymoon. Since our wedding day, I have clung to Dad's promise that we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purposes for them. Romans 8:28. The Praying Wife. I've read many books on marriage. Dino says that every time I read a book on marriage, it created marital upset, so I should just quit reading them. For years, I prayed every day that Dino would come to Jesus. It's not just a figure of speech. I literally prayed. Stormy O'Martian wrote the book, The Power of a Praying Wife, which has 30 chapters, and at the end of each chapter is a prayer for each area of your husband's life. I prayed those prayers repeatedly every month for years, until one day I threw that book against the wall. I prayed upside down, inside out, and backwards. I prayed on mountains, in valleys, on lakes, and on the ground. Dino had a lion's share of prayer service. The first chapter of Stormy O'Martian's book was the prayer for the imperfect praying wife. Today I understand why that was a priority. Without Jesus at the helm of my heart, I would have destroyed our marriage. Lifestyles of the Dino kind. Dino's hobbies, aka lifestyle as he calls it, started out consisting of hunting, summer and winter fishing, golfing, and billiards club. There used to be 2 months of the year when the ice was melting that there was nothing to occupy his time, but over the years, that free time has been filled with other hobbies such as the expansion of hunting coyotes. In the early years of our relationship, when his hobbies took his time away from me, I was resentful about the cost he incurred. Frankly, his hobbies had never been economical and he refused to be budgeted. Dino is like Tim the Tool Man Taylor. He will always find the best gun for the best price, but it will be pricey. The acceptance of his lifestyle allowed me to see that hunting and fishing was also provision for our household, as well as keeping Dino happy and busy. Dino's not just any outdoorsman, he is in the highest class of this order. When he fillets a fish, there are no bones. If you have ever swallowed a fish bone to have it lodged in your throat, uncertain if you were going to live or die, you would appreciate his skills. If you have ever eaten a stinky bull in rut, you would appreciate a hunter that hunts for food, not trophy horns. Dino has always been happiest coasting through life, ignoring and avoiding conflict, so when I would beg him for some relationship time, his response was, "Get a hobby." So I did. Fighting fair. The true foundation of all family units is the marriage. Ideally, a strong marriage should result in a healthy family. I've always wanted my marital relationship to not only look perfect, but to be perfect. If it was anything less than perfect, I definitely did not want anyone to know about it. Obviously, my dreams of perfection were dashed, simply because they were unrealistic. Dino never wanted perfection, and I couldn't make a perfect marriage all by myself. On a scale of 1 to 10, I used to measure our marriage a 4, while Dino would measure it an 8. At least we both agreed that it was less than perfect. You might even wonder how Dino and I could have a strong marriage when we believe different philosophies. Dr. Emerson Eggerichs wrote the book Love and Respect, which was very powerful. He believes that love is the best motivator for wives, and when wives display respect for their husbands, they will return that love. He also states that the Bible initiated the idea of marriage with love and respect. One can test this theory in the reverse and find it true as well. I know because I have. When I have treated my husband with sarcasm and ridicule, he has returned the favor, which, by the way, is also a principle of the Bible. You reap what you sow. Unity is possible even when two do not agree, when loving kindness and respect are displayed as often as possible. For the most part, Dino and I have been kind to one another. When I didn't get the love I needed, I had no choice but to lean on Jesus, and he met my love needs, while continually praying that someday my prayers would be manifest physically and Dino would accept Jesus. Early on in our relationship, we established healthy guidelines for fighting, a necessity because Dino and I are complete opposites. His method of avoidance is often distraction. I'm not sure if it's conscious or unconscious, but he's really good at it, which makes my job of keeping him focused that much more difficult when having an important discussion. However, being a natural counselor/lawyer/negotiator, I was prepared for every debate that arose. Some of our really challenging rules are: number 1, no name calling, and use your words carefully. Do not attempt to hurt your partner's feelings just because you are hurting. Think before you speak and know why you are saying the things that come out of your mouth. I usually know when a conflict is going to happen, so I practice. I run a scenario in my mind many times over with all the different possibilities. It's not about winning, it's about being prepared. Preparation so that future conflicts are eliminated by early resolution. Number 2, listen carefully. Do not interrupt and ask questions for further understanding. Ask for specifics if the partner seems to be generalizing. No bringing up the past unless it is relevant and helpful to resolve the conflict. These are not Dino's strengths, so I need to be very patient with him. 3, talk softly so that the conflict does not become heated. When he starts yelling, I often reciprocate. I confess we are both bullies. Number 4, brainstorm for solutions. Find points where you both agree as a starting point for peace. If I can get this far with Dino, I am in the midst of a miracle. Couples need to remember that conflict is normal, and we need to become masters at negotiating conflict resolution. Always make peace your goal. Cooperation, concessions, and compromise help to resolve a problem. Both parties need to give. The idea is win-win. No keeping score. Dino loves to get points and rewards. One of the best parts of our relationship has been humor. His work and finances. The second and third prayers in Stormy O'Martian's book were for his work and finances. Dino worked for a lumber mill for 18 years, and in all that time he was unsuccessful in achieving his desire to become a millwright apprentice. One night I dreamed that Dino went parachuting with a mill manager. Dino was having trouble with his parachute, and instead of helping Dino, the man allowed him to fall to his death. At that time, Dino's position was one of 3 acting supervisors. Not long after that dream, a situation arose where a subordinate was acting inappropriately, and Dino sent him home. The next day, Dino found himself being reprimanded. He came home devastated. He had been demoted. Dino would have been well within his rights and would have had a good case if he decided to sue the company. Instead, he applied for a new position in a different part of the mill. Little did I know, Dad had a greater plan in the works. The answer to my prayers for Dino that would show him how much God cares for him and which would exceed what I was hoping for. Dino worked diligently as he always had. Shortly thereafter, 2 millwright apprenticeship opportunities came up and Dino submitted his resume. Among the other applicants was Dino's younger brother, whose years with the company and strong work ethic matched his own. I prayed that this time Dino would be chosen. One morning, while dropping the boys off at school, Nabal, Dino's brother, walked over to me and shared his good news. He had been selected as one of the successful candidates for the 2 positions. As well, he informed me that Dino had not been chosen. I hid my disappointment, congratulated him, and headed home. I was so angry, I didn't understand why both brothers could not have been successful. As my pace accelerated, so did my mixed emotions. Addressing Dad, I chanted, "I trust you, I trust you, I trust you." But as I flew through the door of my house, the tears let go and my faith turned accusatory. "Father, I trusted you. How could you let this happen?" I cried my way back to faith. Truly, Dad knew something I did not. When Dino got home from work, I hugged him and we went downtown to buy Nabal a gift. Within a year, Dino applied for a position at a different company, and with his cousin's recommendation, Dino got the job. What Dino thought was a cut in pay and holidays turned out to be the best job we could have ever asked for. This job exceeded my hopes and prayers. The recognition Dino now received from his supervisors was worth its weight in gold. He gained weight working there from all the times they fed him. He was happy, and I was happy for him. Turned out that this company was more than the answer to my prayers. Although I didn't work for the company, Dad would use me mightily for the increase of his kingdom. We'll call the new company BMD. Not long after Dino was hired, I started discovering Christian men and women who had been praying for BMD since its inception. Now I was empowered by being part of the BMD prayer club. I even had the honor and privilege of meeting the CEO of BMD and beginning a friendship with him. The encounter happened at a time when I was working nights for one of the Whitecourt taxi cab companies. My boss, Diego, told me to go to BMD and pick up a passenger and drive him to the Edmonton International Airport. Diego told me that the passenger was the owner of the company and he would sit in the back seat for the whole duration, not speaking to me. He would play on his computer and talk on his phone, making it an easy fare. The ride did not go exactly as Diego described. BMD is 11 kilometers northwest of Whitecourt. Edmonton is 250 kilometers southeast of Whitecourt. But before we had breached the Whitecourt town limits, the very tall CEO had climbed between the front seats of the van to sit in the front passenger seat. I guess he figured I might be interesting to talk to. We chatted all the way to the airport. The ride was delightful. He found me funny and I found him respectful and fascinating. I told him how wonderful I thought he was for keeping the old-timers on and respecting their experience as opposed to many other companies that were discarding their experienced gentlemen as soon as they turned 65. It was fun to compare marital stories. He had purchased his wife a Rolls-Royce for her birthday, and I bought my husband a compound bow. Not just any compound bow. It was a Matthews Solo Cam. Very comparable. Only $320,000 difference in the price of our gifts. Nonetheless, they both came from the heart. I complained to him about my husband's spending habits, and he jokingly offered to have my husband's paychecks directly deposited into my account. What a wonderful man. In jest, I responded in kind to his attempt at marital mediation with, "Oh, Solomon, I already have total access to all his money. But thanks for being helpful." Our banter made the trip seem like minutes. Upon arrival at the airport, Solomon signed my transport ticket and we said our goodbyes and I headed for home. The next day, Diego called me in what seemed to be a panic. His words were, "Judi, what did you do to that man?" My mind was racing trying to figure out what he could possibly mean by that statement. "You need to come to the office so we can talk about this." Uh-oh, was I in trouble? And if so, what for? The trip was wonderful, and I was pretty sure Solomon was pleased with my company. When I arrived at the office, Diego repeated himself in a jovial, accusatory, but suspicious tone. He handed me the ticket, which I had not looked at before I submitted it the evening prior. Looking it over, I noticed there was a number in the tip space. With a coy smile, Diego handed me the money. "What did you do to that man, Judi?" In our mutual buffoonery, I replied, "You'll never know, Diego," pretending to stuff the cash between the cleavage I didn't have. Diego and I shared a special friendship. Our friendship was based on the conception that we were always up to no good. Like there was a secret only the two of us knew. Dino's working experience at BMD has edified our family. Within a 10-year span, in recognition, Dino received the millwright designation he desired after completing a steamfitter pipefitter ticket, both of which gradually increased his income. He enjoys working with a great team of men. As a result of his position, I am finally able to give proper attention to writing this book, which has been a long-awaited dream of mine. In my humble opinion, our story proves the power behind Dino's praying wife. His sexuality and affection. Days 4 and 5 were devoted to praying for Dino's sexuality and affection. Dino was what Mum called a typical man. He's affectionate with a healthy sex drive. After reading 5 Love Languages written by Gary Chapman, I determined that Dino's primary love language was physical touch, and mine was quality and quantity time. Sure, words of affirmation, gifts, and acts of service are great too, but for maximum effect, that's what we respond to. Over time, I've learned that success in the bedroom meant keeping our bed chamber sacred and private. However, it hasn't always been that way. Beginning when I was 15, our sex life wasn't as private or respected as I would have liked it to be. Remember, I said that Dino's house was the party house, and although we locked the door, some perverted moron picked the lock and put us on display. Over the years, I've tolerated the snide comments and perverted innuendos, pretending like they didn't bother me. Healing from all the different forms of sexual abuse and trying to achieve healthy boundaries has been a really long journey. I've had to revisit and repent of thought processes that I didn't even recognize had become strongholds. It was a revelation when I realized that I didn't have to accept and tolerate perversion. Perversion was never intended to be normal. There were times when the sexual abuse negatively affected our married life. Memories of being dragged out to the outhouse in the middle of the night for some unwanted sexual attempt or waking up with someone on top of me were sometimes triggered. My puppy love crush eventually decided he was a homosexual, but not before he, like some other boys, used my body as an instrument of experimentation. Needless to say, Dino found out that I didn't like to be awakened from sleep, and I didn't like being touched in certain ways that provoked flashbacks. For years, I lived with an abnormal and unusual fear that Dino would become a homosexual and reject me as well. I've learned to recognize irrational fears and replace them with truth and gain liberty. Romans 12:2 says, "Let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect." His marriage. For years, every month on the 21st day, I would pray for our marriage until one day I snapped. I threw that book up against the wall with my hope for our marriage. After my temper tantrum, I walked over and picked it up and put it back on the bookshelf, and that's where it stayed for a couple years. Early in my marriage, I identified another strange fear operating in my life because my dad had died at 28. My husband would too. They worked in the same industry, lumber mill. Often I would find myself imagining the police showing up at my door to tell me Dino was killed at work or had been in a car accident, or if he was late getting home from ice fishing, as he always was, I would imagine he had broken through the ice, frozen, and drowned. So I didn't really breathe until after his 29th birthday. Then, when the realization set in that our marriage was never going to be perfect, I became indifferent and complacent. In my opinion, Dino wasn't even trying to make our marriage what I wanted it to be, so I started hoping for his death. Well, death is a certainty. It's going to happen sometime. He smokes, consumes pop, chips, chocolate bars, and candy like nobody else I know. He's overweight and malnourished. The reality is that death comes for us all. Dino's dream. Knowing how much I enjoy dream interpretation, Dino exclaimed, "Jude, I had a weird dream last night." "Do tell, dear." "I was given 2 days to live. I had to get my affairs in order before I died." "Okay. Well, who else was in the dream?" "My dad. I said goodbye to him." "How were you going to die?" "I don't know." "That was the whole dream?" "Yes." As a young man, Dino revealed to me that he couldn't see himself living past the age of 40, so the dream caused a bit of concern, but after 2 days passed, Dino and I decided the dream wasn't literal. Upon giving the dream way too much thought, Dad finally told me to mind my own business, that he was talking to Dino, not me. But I wanted to know. At the very least, it was good to know that Dad was attempting to communicate with Dino, but was Dino listening? Separation? It was sometime after the 7-year itch when I asked Dino for a separation. I had been pondering life without him. If Dino and I separated, it definitely was not in the best interest of our children, but would it benefit my well-being? I've often heard it said that you should not stay together for the children. I'm not one of those who believes that. My children have always been the reason I do or don't do something. From the moment I conceived my first child, my thinking changed. My driving habits changed. My eating habits changed. Dad gave me the spiritual ability to see further ahead than I've ever seen before. Maybe that's just simply practicing unselfishness and the good of all parties. When I asked Dino for a separation, he very wisely declared, "No, if we get a separation, we're getting a divorce." I don't know how he does it, but Dad uses Dino. Dino is unaware of it, but it's so clear to me when he does. I wanted change, but at that time I was not prepared to stand firm on my ultimatum. Maybe I feared he really meant what he said. I doubt it. He would cry like a baby to get me back. I've only seen Dino cry twice in our 33 years of relationship, and I know of 2 other times where he retreated to a solitary place. I have to say at those times I was worried that he would try to do himself in. He's the type of person when he sets his mind to something, he does it without consulting anyone. I remember the first time I saw a man cry. It was during Victory in Christ's 12-step program. Immediately I looked down because I was raised that men crying was shameful, but Dad urged me to look at him, to see him as a person and treat him with compassion in my heart. I didn't rush over there and hug him because that would have been awkward. Thank God for the rules in the group. I did look at him differently with a heart full of empathy. What if I had to endure what that fellow went through? Would I also cry? When I talked to Dad about Dino's lack of compassion, he suggested that I change. I was not happy that once again coming to a resolution fell upon my shoulders, shaking my head at Dad with the unspoken question, how much can one person change? But the alternative seemed much worse than just changing my perspective or something about my own character. With Dad's help, it could only make me better. I decided to change my focus and be content in all circumstances. Marriage is for better or for worse. What genius put those words in our wedding vows? The right question. I've witnessed the short and long-term effects of divorce on individuals and families, and I definitely didn't want that for my children and their children. Playing Detective Judi, I've inquired into the lives of friends and acquaintances in the search to further understand the family unit and the inner working of hearts that have been damaged as a result of divorce. It's obvious that love is the victim. The question that needs to be repeated and daily asked by husbands and wives is, for the sake of our family and in order to protect and preserve love, what must I do now? On the contrary, it seems that the question being asked and answered in our society today is, for my sake and in order to protect and preserve me, what will I do? Not understanding that our best interests are better served by answering the first question rather than the second. At least for me, understanding came after I chose to love my family and squash my own selfish desires. Hopefully, it goes without saying that I was never physically abused by my husband. In my opinion, there are exceptions for divorce, such as violence. Micro-cheating. In 2010, after homeschooling for 2 years, I pondered what kind of job I wanted to get outside the home. It had always been a dream of mine to homeschool my children, but I had to wait until Dino was finally ready to let me do so. You see, Dad always promotes unity in marriage. Dino's response wasn't great, but I still took it as a green light. He said I couldn't do any permanent damage, and I agreed. Dean chose homeschooling because he was being bullied, so I taught him grade 7, and then the following year Taryn wanted to try it for his grade 5 year. I'll get into the homeschooling story more in depth in part 3, but for now I just mention it to say that when Taryn was ready to go back to school, I was ready to go back to work. The job Dad provided was in the area of oilfield administration. Working in a male-dominated environment, new relationships were made. For your information, I'm a people person and can be flirtatious. When I was a teenager, Auntie Millie's advice to us girls supported the 1989 movie When Harry Met Sally's theory that men and women can't be friends. I was going to keep my eyes on the prize. I claimed my workplace for Jesus and the Joseph anointing. While doing the best job I possibly could, I was going to bring everyone in that environment to the saving grace of Jesus Christ. All the relationships that I established at work were very special to me, but there was one lease operator whom I conversed with almost every day when he was on shift, who became one of my best friends. My heart very subtly became invested. Upon hearing of his resignation, I had to excuse myself. I told my boss I needed to run home. Driving away from my place of employment, I could barely contain my tears. What was happening to me? Why was I behaving this way? Gran was 12 years my senior, and I had never been attracted to older men before. On the contrary, due to my sexual abuse issues, I thought older men were perverts. After collecting my emotions, I returned to work. The next time I spoke with Gran, I asked him if I could treat him to supper as a farewell. I asked the other employees if they wanted to come, but apparently everyone was busy. Before I did any of that, I asked Dino's permission to buy Gran supper and invited him to come with us. Dino allowed it, but he didn't want to accompany me. So Gran and I met at Boston Pizza and talked for 3 hours. During our conversation, he revealed that he was a Christian. He had never spoken of his faith prior to this encounter. Men's faith has always stirred up curiosity and mystery in me. All I knew for certain was that men practice their faith differently than women do, and I always wondered why. In my experience, women are usually more outspoken about their love for Jesus. Maybe it's awkward for men to say that they are in love with a man, or rather connect intimately with a God that presented himself as a male. Regardless, at last I understood why Gran and I connected so well. I was deeply attracted to Jesus in him. His farewell supper turned into the beginning of a friendship. Gran had been hired on an offshore rig near Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and we messaged and emailed often. As I learned more about Gran, I found out he was a biker. Knowing that he was a biker was like a challenge. If Gran could do it, so could I. There is an air of mystery and excitement surrounding bikers. I never knew how much until I became one. While Gran was away on the other side of the world working, I signed up for a motorcycle learner's course. When Gran returned to Canada, we went for a motorcycle ride with his friends. I had the time of my life. In an attempt to throw cold water on the flame of my heart, I told Dino of my feelings for Gran. He was angry. He said I was dating Gran and accused me of cheating on him. The new word society uses is micro-cheating. I couldn't deny it because in my heart I loved Gran, even though Mum says I love everyone, which I do. My relationship with Gran made me analyze God's love versus man's love. There was never a confusion in my mind about love and sex. As a survivor, I knew that much. Sex should be reserved for married couples as Dad intended it to be, and I kept it that way. Love is to be given to everyone within healthy boundaries. I admit that temptation was real and powerful. No temptation has overtaken you but such as is common to man, and God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. 1 Corinthians 10:13, New King James Version. Looking on the bright side of the emotional affair, my heart had been awoken from a state of numbness and indifference toward love in my marriage. My bucket list existed, and I began life anew, perspective and all. Our marriage is better today than it ever was in the past. I have forgiven Dino for his immaturity and act of revenge. Hopefully one day when he accepts Jesus' sacrifice for his sin, he will be able to forgive me too. For now, we continue to walk out our marriage together, putting the past behind us. What's a covenant? Learning that marriage is a covenant rather than a contract has been a very important teaching that Dad has instilled in me. A covenant is even stronger than a commitment. My covenant is the one between Father God and Jesus Christ. It's the newest covenant. Dr. Jonathan Welton, D.Min, the head of WeltonAcademy.com, wrote a book, Understanding the Whole Bible. Within its pages, he breaks down the different covenants that Dad made with Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, and Jesus. The covenant Dad made with Jesus is our unbreakable covenant, the love covenant. We are called to a higher love greater than loving ourselves. Our standard is Jesus' love for us. Jesus' love consists of laying our lives down for others. We model Jesus' love for everyone, especially our spouse, because often they are the hardest to love. People say they fall out of love. That was never love. Love never ends and it never fails. You certainly cannot fall out of it. Acts of love can be as simple as opening the door for others or choosing the back seat. The greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the servant of all, the one who loves the most. So it's absolutely essential that we study love so that we can operate in it. Our inheritance. Taking the covenant of Jesus one step further regarding all the promises and provisions Dad supplied for his people in the Old Testament, he assured me that these same provisions are accessible for all of us today. Let's use the analogy of my last will and testament. When I die, my will becomes active. Whatever provisions I set up in my last wishes will be dispersed to the beneficiaries. As a result of Jesus' death, he chose to share all the assets he acquired with those of us, his brothers and sisters, who choose him in return. The best husband. Every morning, like clockwork, the first item on my to-do list is devotions. Devotions is a time of prayer and worship or relationship building with God. I set aside the first part of my day because I feel this confirms Dad's, dearest Alzaj Deity, importance in my life. Alzaj is the Arabic word meaning husband. Laying on the carpet and closing my eyes, I quiet my spirit so I can better listen to what my Lord has for me each morning. Sometimes I envision myself running up the spiritual staircase of heaven and bursting through the clouds to see what I can see. One time I found Jesus standing beside Cinderella's coach. He was wearing a tuxedo. I looked down at my attire and suddenly my attire transformed into Cinderella's gown. He held out his hand and helped me into the coach. After getting in and sitting beside me, the coach began to move. I was experiencing a dream come true. As a youngster, I used to daydream about Cinderella all the time. She was the strongest kind of woman. Although forced to serve, she did it well. For her service, she was exalted into the place of a queen. In that one act, Jesus showed me that I was a major importance to him too. Realizing my marriage to Dino would never be perfect, but that Jesus was able to make all my dreams come true helped me to finally lay down my life for Dino. Jesus made sure I knew that if I was the only person on earth that he died for, it would still have been worth it to him. In return, he let me see that when I lay down my life for Dino, like his sacrifice, my life has purpose and meaning. A lifelong desire realized. Dino and I met in 1985, married in 1995, and will celebrate 25 married years in 2020. Over the years, I repeatedly asked Dino to take 15 minutes a day and donate it to me, but he couldn't do it. What I was asking somehow violated his spontaneous nature. The only plans worthy of making were given to hunting and fishing, and the only plans he committed to after marriage were weekly billiards. 15 minutes for me sounded like work, and he did plenty of that and didn't want any more. Over the years, I had many reasons to guard my heart and mind against the emotional hurt I had endured. When I finally decided not to settle for less than I wanted and was ready to stand by an ultimatum, I put an understanding to Dino this way. I explained to Dino that each time I read or experience something about God that I wanted to share with him was another suffered rejection. We had gotten married, had kids, raised those kids, and now we were moving into a new season of life where we would either grow further apart or intentionally grow together. This time, when I suggested allotted time spent together, my request was met with a more amenable response. Praise God for caring about the desires of my heart. I had waited on Dad for the answer to my prayer and received the right words at the right time. Suddenly, my request from the past was met with the spirit of reconciliation. Sharing daily devotions with my husband has always been a desire of my heart. Although we are not daily yet, we are regular. My love language is quality time and conversation, so devotions fills my love cup. Today we are relearning to trust one another. I give him my heart and he gives me glimpses of his, but it's progress. Dad declares, "For I am jealous for you with the jealousy of God himself. I promised you as a pure bride to one husband, Christ." 2 Corinthians 11:2. New Living Translation. Let us be glad and rejoice, and let us give honor to him, Jesus, for the time has come for the wedding feast of the Lamb, and his bride has prepared herself. Revelation 19:7 NLT. For your Creator will be your husband. The Lord of Heaven's armies is his name. Isaiah 54:5 NLT. Prayer. Thank you, Jesus, that you can see the bigger picture of my life. Help us in willing submission to trust in your wisdom wholeheartedly. We give you our marriages and commit ourselves to prayer. Thank you for the privilege of watching you work. Thank you for the insight so that we can pray specifically. In your name, amen. Questions. Number 1. If you are married, do you make it a practice of giving your marital issues to Jesus to fix and committing yourself to prayer? Number 2. What are some instructions Jesus has imparted to you to help make your marriage stronger? Number 3. What is your marriage mission statement?